Hello boys and girls, well, we're on to chapter 14 now. The last chapter ended when a shout went up from the ship, "Ship ahoy!" So there's another ship bearing down on the pirate ship. What kind of a ship is that? Well, what's going to happen next? Well, let's find out when we get into chapter 14, which is called The Boarders. The sailor rushed out, followed closely by the rat captain, and as Nogger turned to leave, he spoke to Mr. Rabbit and Mr. Mousey. "Could be nothing, he knows, but just in case, keep out of sight for a bit, eh?" He turned to leave and promptly ran into the door, which had closed behind the retreating rat. With a heavy thud, he fell unconscious to the floor. Running over, Mr. Rabbit could see he had very dramatically knocked himself out. "Hey, Nogger! Wake up, you daft beaver!" "Well, perhaps if you got off his chest and stopped pulling at his ears like that, he might be able to breathe better," suggested Mr. Mousey. "Oh, yes. Sorry, Nogger. Are you all right?" "I don't think he can hear you, Mr. Rabbit. He really has put himself out for the count, hasn't he?" Checking that he was still breathing, the little mouse screwed up his face and thought. He saw the bed in the corner and spoke again. "Let's see if we can get him onto that bed. The least we can do is make him comfortable." Now, Nogger was no lightweight beaver, but after a bit of panting and blowing, the two friends had the still unconscious creature up onto the bed. There, at least whenever he comes to, he'll not have a sore back. Mr. Rabbit seemed not to hear. He was looking distant, his head cocked to one side. "Listen, Mr. Mousey, what do you hear?" Mr. Mousey listened. "Why, nothing. What do you hear?" "Nothing." He still had his head cocked to the side. So if there's nothing to hear, what are you listening to, Mr. Rabbit?" "I told you," replied the rabbit with a small scowl on his face. "Nothing." "Nothing," repeated the slightly bewildered mouse. "Is that it? You don't hear anything?" "That's just it, Mr. Mousey. Wouldn't you think that with a ship spotted, there'd be a lot more noise or something? I just hear nothing." By now, Mr. Mousey had more or less gathered that Mr. Rabbit heard nothing, so he made a suggestion. "Come on, Nogger's fine where he is. We'll go and take a quiet look to see what's going on." Leaving the beaver snoring on the bed, they slipped out of the cabin and stole silently along the passageway outside. "This way," whispered the mouse, leading his friend along and below the decks above. Going along the passageways, he retraced the route back to the bow of the ship that he had made days before. After a few minutes, they were behind the door that led from the forecastle at the bow of the ship to the deck above. This was a very low door, partly hatch, and it lay a little ajar, as it often did during the day, to allow ventilation of the cabins below. From here, they were able to observe almost all of the main deck whilst keeping themselves hidden. What they saw was not what they expected at all. A large single-masted ship, bigger, if anything, than the pirate one, lay alongside them. Two gangways were set up between the two vessels, and on the deck before them, the pirates, with the captain in front, faced a party of strangers. They were small, swarthy men, a little taller than the rat, and dressed in flowing robes tied around the middle with black leather belts. On their heads, most wore turban-like headgear wrapped around golden or silver helmets. All were bearded, and one particularly bearded one was talking to the captain. He could just be made out by the two listening creatures. "Indeed, we are greatly in your debt for allowing us the very great honour of visiting your fine and handsome ship." "Oh, just get on with it," shot back the captain. "And we'd soon have boarded ye and left ye with an empty ship if he hadn't been flying that distress signal. Now, what's your problem?" Of course, I had forgotten that you honourable gentlemen were indeed adventurers of the sea, men of great courage, sailors of renown. Oh, yes, you've already said that. This was the impatient voice of Digger. Just answer the captain, or you'll be answering this blade of mine. The turbaned leader bowed and spoke again. Please, 1,000 pardons. Our plight, I fear, is great. We have fought off an army of the Scallies, and have many wounded. Our ship is taking in water, and may not last another storm. Our humble plea is that you might take aboard our poor unfortunates, lest they perish on our wounded vessel, and take them to the port of Torquent, for greater care than we can afford on board. For this we would pay handsomely. When the speaker had mentioned fighting the Scallies, the pirates muttered in approval. When he referred to payment, the muttering came closer to a cheer. There was a pause as the captain seemed to weigh up the situation. What's going on? Whispered the rabbit to the mouse. Who's that lot then? Mr. Mousey looked unsure. I don't know, but judging by the captain's expression, he's not too happy with the whole thing. I think he'll probably help, though. As if to prove Mr. Mousey right, the captain spoke up. Aye, all right then, but we'll only take them to Benestol or Benestamar. We have no business in Torquent. Mr. Mousey still thought he looked very uncertain, but the turbaned man looked delighted. He clapped his hands quickly 3 times and called to his men in a strange tongue. They immediately made their way back over the gangplanks and began to return, 2 men at a time with stretchers carrying their wounded. And now a celebration toast to the brave mariners who have most graciously come to our rescue. He clapped his hands again, and several large jugs were produced. Pewter goblets appeared and were passed around all the pirates. Bearded, dark-skinned men moved among the crew, pouring out a share to each. To our saviours of the sea, to the captain of true-blooded and mighty sailors, cried out the leader of the men. As the pirates began to drink from their goblets, Mr. Mousey started. Oh, there's something funny going on here. You mean that all they're doing is drinking, and no one brought any toast? Suggested his pal. No, a toast is a drink. Mr. Rabbit looked confused. I mean, only the pirates are drinking. In a toast, everyone drinks. Sure enough, apart from the captain and a handful of other sailors, Hasher, Digger, 1 or 2 others, all the pirates were quaffing down their drink. Not one of the strangers so much as had a goblet in his hands. Their leader began to speak again. There is one other small request I have of your honourable personage, he said in a quieter, secretive tone, addressing the captain in particular. Could it possibly be that in your traversing of the mountain of the oceans, you may have by any chance have come across 2 certain creatures? 2 certain creatures? Repeated the captain warily. We meet a great many people on our travels. Perhaps you'd like to be more specific, like. Well, a mouse and a rabbit, to be precise. They travel together, and please forgive my idle question, but it is a matter of some importance. He was rubbing his hands slowly together as he spoke, and Mr. Mousey did not like the expression on his face one bit. Psst! Whispered Mr. Rabbit, altogether too loudly, in the mouse's ear. That's a coincidence, eh? What do you mean? Asked Mr. Mousey absently. He was thinking hard. Well, you and me. He pointed at Mr. Mousey and himself. You're a mouse, and I'm a rabbit. Well, it was a coincidence, Mr. Mousey already felt uneasy about another thing he noticed also bothered him considerably. The wounded lying on the stretchers, there were now about 20 of them, were covered by blankets, but on a couple of them the blankets lay kind of shoddily. Poking out below these, he could distinctly see the metallic gleam of armour, and from under one, the clear outline of a sword. "My captain," the stranger was speaking again, "you do not answer. Perhaps I should ask more forcefully." He emphasised the end of his sentence in a much harder tone between clenched teeth. "More forcefully." Mr. Mousey thought it sounded like a threat. So obviously did the captain. He straightened his back and his right arm hovered about his cutlass handle hanging on the right side of his belt. "I answer on my own ship as I see fit. Now, you can leave my ship. I'll deliver these men as I said I'll do." He looked quite threatening now himself. "The only force used on this ship will be the force of my fighting men," he snarled. The stranger broke into a nasty grin, and with a flourish of his outstretched arm, he spoke in a humorous laugh. "Fighting men? You mean these sleeping clowns?" Sure enough, as the captain looked to his left and to his right, sailors were staggering about, and some were already lying down, fast asleep on the deck where they had collapsed. "Drugged! He's drugged my men, the scoundrel! I knew he was up to no good." The captain looked viciously at the stranger. Behind him, those who had suspiciously refused to drink from the offered goblets drew up, cutlasses and swords in their hands. Digger and Hasher stood either side of the rat, and behind them were 4 others, 2 ferret twins, an otter called Skish, and Pignose. All the rest lay around uselessly. "Ah, very impressive. I don't think. You filthy vermin," cried out the stranger now in a harsher tone. "More than enough for ye and thy dirty scallies," growled the rat, his own cutlass now in hand. At this the stranger gave a thrilling shriek with his tongue, and immediately 20 more of his men leapt from the stretchers in full armour, swords drawn. "Checkmate! Checkmate, rat!" he snarled. "Now where are the rodent? Where is the rodent? Where is the rodent and the bunny? Tell us, and we'll leave this rat-infested ship. Hold your tongue, and we'll give you reason to wish you'd treated Corsair Palak of Descalador with better civility." As he spoke, he pulled off the turban and false beard, revealing his black armour, helmet, and rough, hairy face. "Bunny? Did he just say bunny? Did he mean me? Is he talking about us? He did say bunny, didn't he? Bunny! Bunny! Me!" Well, if there was one thing that really got up Mr. Rabbit's blood, it was being called Bunny. Before Mr. Mousey could get a hand to him, Mr. Rabbit strode out of the low door onto a deck, and walking straight up to the black Corsair, pulled out his cutlass and looked right into his startled face. "Did you just call me a bunny? Did I hear you right? Bunny? And that other funny word you kept saying, did you mean my friend Mr. Mousey?" As he spoke, he waggled the cutlass in front of the stranger, called Palak's open-mouthed face. Well, the show of anger might have been a lot more impressive had Mr. Rabbit thought to take the cutlass out of its sheath first. It also would have helped if he had been holding it the right way round. By now, Palak had got over his initial surprise. "So, Captain, you have been keeping them from me, I see. After we get the other, I think we shall be rid of this stinking vessel. Where is the mouse?" Well, Mr. Rabbit's surge of bravery was all too quickly fading. It wasn't helped by two of the enemy coming forward and grabbing him by an arm each. "Well, what I meant was, Bunny's not so bad once you get used to it," he said, looking up into the face of one of his captors. You wouldn't mind just holding me a bit less tightly there, only that's actually genuine rabbit fur you're squishing there." "Let him go. I wish he was more alive than my sword is about to make ye," said the rat captain. Without waiting for a reply, the pirates, as one man, leapt forward, weapons raised, forcing the two holding the rabbit to pull back. At a signal from Palak, all his swordsmen charged the small group of pirates, and there began a tremendous fight on the deck. Swords and cutlasses clashed, and as they fought, the pirates let out wild yells and with great skill and ability pushed back the first wave of armoured enemy. With a shout of command, the captain formed the 7 of them into a tight circle, facing the enemy approaching them from every angle and protecting each other's back. From where he was watching, Mr. Mousey could see that they were hopelessly outnumbered. It was at least 6 or 7 to 1, and it would only be a matter of time until not only were the pirates beaten, but Mr. Rabbit would be at best a prisoner, at worst as dead as the pirates were also sure to be. He looked around and, seeing a rope hanging from the mizzenmast, made for it. Meanwhile, the pirates were proving quite a foe to the Discallies. The ferret twins fought side by side, matching one another's cuts and parries in perfect time. They had between them cut down 4 of the enemy alone. Digger, the smallest, was being picked out by the enemy swordsmen, and although he was able for them, by force of their numbers they were tearing him and wearing him down. Hasher fought like an animal. Well, being an animal helped, of course, but his skills as a swordsman were being made obvious to his opponents. To his left, Pignose had been cut on the shoulder. It didn't seem to be slowing him down as yet, and he slashed. His yells and shrieks of war as he was fighting were terrible to listen to. The captain himself was to Hasher's right, and he was cold faced as he rallied his men. All around him the rest of his crew lay sleeping and unaware of the mortal danger being faced by their comrades. The captain wished for not just the first time that he had guessed sooner the nature of the drugged drink. He knew that with a full fighting crew no swordsman of Tuscalador could stand. But grimly he fought on, too aware of what the next few minutes might hold for them all. In the midst of all this, Palak motioned to the rabbit's captors and they moved off in the direction of the gangplanks. Mr. Rabbit struggled and kicked, but it was no good. He was totally overpowered. Behind him his cutlass clinked along the deck, still sheathed and attached to its belt by a thin leather lanyard. With his attention now focused on the sword fight, he turned his thoughts to the mouse. He was thinking, if the rabbit's here, the mouse will not be far away. Something suddenly flashed by in front of his face. Before he had time to react, Mr. Mousey flew by, swinging on a rope, just like a trapeze artist. Just as Mr. Rabbit was about to be carried across the gangplank, he felt himself grabbed from behind and whisked up into the air. "Ooh-ah!" wailed Mr. Rabbit, at a loss to understand what was happening to him. "Hold on to the rope!" yelled a familiar voice. Looking up, he saw Mr. Mousey straining with all his weight as he held onto the rope with one hand and Mr. Rabbit with the other. He would have done better to do as he had been told. Mr. Mousey could no longer hold on, and the two of them tumbled to the deck, landing right at the feet of the captain. The captain wasted no time. "Quick! To the forward hatch! 1, 2, 3, go!" Pushing the two behind him, The seven fought a retreat to the door from which Mr. Mousey and Mr. Rabbit had entered at the deck. At the entrance, a swarthy Discali blocked the way, sword held directly at them. The pirates were too involved with defending their retreat to do anything about him, and so Mr. Mousey brought out his cutlass and attacked. The swordsman blocked Mr. Mousey's blow and swung his sword around to slice back at the mouse. But as he did so, Mr. Mousey had learned well from Hasher. Instead of simply blocking the cut, he pulled back and struck the man on his unprotected side as his blade skimmed within inches of his head. Although armoured, the cutlass made a deep dent in the metal, sending the gasping enemy headlong across the deck. The way was clear. Within seconds, all 9 of them were below deck, the helmeted men above attempting to follow through the narrow door and being fought off by the defenders. "Now, little uns, run and make good thy escape. We'll hold 'em here as long as possible," said the captain, throwing Mr. Rabbit back his cutlass that he had snatched from the deck. "But how? Where?" asked the mouse, panting. The captain merely gave Mr. Mousey a knowing look as he hurriedly continued. "And now, take the chart on the table, lad. It has more details than thy book. Good luck, and fly thee safe to heroes. Now run!" Well, Mr. Mousey's head went blank in shock as he and Mr. Rabbit were literally shoved up the passageway but toward the stern. The last they saw of the captain and his brave men was a sight of them fighting and pulling back step by step. Well, Mr. Mousey shook himself, and the two raced as fast as they could, retracing their path all the way back to the cabin at the rear with the table and the still snoring Nogger. "Over there, in the wardrobe, the packs," he shouted out of breath to Mr. Rabbit. Rushing to the pigeonholes, he stuck an arm in and felt for the carpet. It wasn't there! Collecting himself, he tried another, then another. Outside from the passageway he could hear the sounds of swords clashing, crashing together, and it was coming closer. "Oh, where did I put that carpet?" he cried aloud. By now the rabbit had the packs and had set them in the middle of the floor. Just then his eye caught something in the bottom of one of the very bottom recesses. Putting an arm in, he pulled out the magic carpet. Outside he could plainly hear the yells of Pignose. "Quick! Move aside!" he shouted to his pal. Mr. Rabbit jumped to one side, and the mouse threw the carpet unfurled onto the floor. "Get on and grab our packs!" As he gave the commands, he ran over and opened the windows. The sound of feet running on wooden passageways was right outside the door. Palak's angry voice yelled, "Now, you fools! Before they escape, get to the door!" Leaping beside his friend on the carpet, Mr. Mousey shouted, "Carpet, arise! Forward, at great speed!" With only the slightest hesitation, the carpet reared and shot out the window like a bolt of lightning. From the bed, a wide-eyed Nogger gasped, "What was that?" Bleary-eyed and sore-headed, he went to follow the two, who, as far as he could make out, had somehow disappeared out through the door without touching the ground. Things were even fuzzier than usual for the beaver, which was probably explained why, in staggering over to the window, he bumped his knees against the sill, and while still trying to regain his balance, promptly fell head first out through the window. Oh, well, that was quite a fight, wasn't it? Those brave pirates. And how come the captain seemed to know something? Anyway, Nogger has now fallen out the window after Mr. Mousey and Mr. Rabbit have disappeared on their carpet over the sea. So, well, we'll have to go to chapter 15 to find out. Oh, anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. And you look after yourselves and be good to your folks. And I'll see you next time. God bless, boys and girls. Bye-bye.